Hey Chris, what approach do you have for not getting floaty animation after switching from step to spline? Do you want to know what the secret is? The secret's more poses. There's no easy way around it. So yeah, it's largely just that there's just not enough detail in your posing. You need to have more poses. I think that's I don't think I've ever had that experience where you read it a lot where people dread going from step to spline, and the reason why it sucks for them is like I've thought about this. Like you think of a more like because you've got your stepped poses in, right? Say, and you know in your mind what it's going to look like once you've gone to spline, and it looks great. So I think over time, once you've got those poses in, I think your mind just starts filling in the gaps with the best case scenario. So you start tricking yourself over time that actually it's really snappy and cool, and you get so used to it that actually when you switch from step to spline or linear or whatever, suddenly you're snapped out of it looks different, and now you can actually see it for what it is, and the fact that it just doesn't have enough poses. Because if you've got all your key poses, you've got all your anticipations, you've got all your follow through poses, like your exaggerated poses, you've got all your held poses, you've got breakdowns in. Like once you've started checking all those boxes, you've basically got the majority of your animation anyway. And what happens is usually like people haven't got like a held pose in. You know, like a held pose, like if in like I don't have it open anymore, but like for a punch in that Evangelion clip I showed where there was the punch like this, and then over time it progressed to a punch which was kind of like that. What you would have blocked in was just a punch like this, and then there's no progression to the other punch. It just goes from that and then it goes into something else. So you need that information in your scene, otherwise when you switch it's going to be missing. The other way to get past it is to not work in stepped in the first place. I know everyone says to work in stepped, and I'm doing it right now, but I'm doing it for a reason. I only work in stepped if I'm doing things very specific. Like this is very specific and I'm trying to focus on these poses. But usually I would just key poses in like every 4 frames, and I would step between them using the keyboard. So it's basically, it would be in stepped anyway, except I could press play. And even if I pressed play, it would give me the frames in between those. In the 4 frames that I've set, it would give me the frames in between. But they're a mess and it's not really timed out yet. And I like to do that because then I can keep an eye on my curves. So if I'm doing a spin attack or just any kind of move where there's the potential for the character to gimbal out, that's the stuff that gets you when you're not paying attention. Like you can't overlook that stuff if you're not animating in stepped. You're animating in linear or spline or whatever, you're gonna see if your controls are gimbaling out straight away. You'll start fixing it, and what happens is you go too far and you're posing in stepped and stuff's slipping out everywhere, and maybe you push some controls too far and you've forgotten about the rotation order of certain controls. Like I know a big problem area is like hips here. So you know how you've got these 2 controls, you've got a control here which basically this is just like the hip roll control, right? I never translate this, and I only rotate it as a plus. It's detail on top of what this control does. And I see people end up with things that look like rotated this around like this, and then they've actually rotated this around this, and then they've rotated this around like this. And for all intents and purposes, it's pretty much the same pose, right? But I've wrecked what's going on underneath. And that's never going to interpolate nicely between pose A and pose B. I feel like I'm going off on a rant about step pose, but I think it's just things to consider.